Sri Lanka is experiencing an unprecedented economic collapse, which is causing its government to be in a deep crisis. Islanders are finding it increasingly difficult to import food for their 22 million people because of a collapse in foreign reserves and a crippling need to pay their debts. The situation has led to several weeks of violent anti-government protests that ended with the Prime Minister's resignation. Many people are angry with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, whom critics say caused the country to enter the economic crisis. The Sri Lankan Prime Minister says the country's debt-laden economy has collapsed because it is running out of money to pay for food and fuel. Short of cash to pay for these imports and also in default of its debt, it is looking for help from its neighbors India and China and from the International Monetary Fund. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was talking about the monumental task he has to accomplish in transforming the country's economy, which he said has headed for rock bottom. Sri Lankans are skipping meals as they endure food shortages and waiting for hours to queue to buy scarce fuel. It's a harsh reality for a country whose economy has been growing quickly, with a growing middle class, but the recent financial crisis has intensified its financial crisis. Hey everyone, welcome to Billion Stories. In this video, we are going to explain why the Sri Lankan economy has collapsed. How serious is the Sri Lankan crisis and why is the Sri Lankan economy in such dire straits? So, let's get started. How serious is the Sri Lankan crisis? In Sri Lanka, there is no shortage of food, but people are simply becoming very hungry. The UN World Food Programme reports that 9 out of 10 families skip meals or skip food altogether in order to have enough food, and 3 million people are receiving emergency food aid. Doctors are trying to use social media to try and get important supplies of equipment and medicine. Sri Lankans are increasingly seeking passports to go abroad to work. Government workers are being given an extra day off for 3 months in order to allow them to grow their own food. In short, people are suffering enormously and desperately want things to get better. Why is the Sri Lankan economy in such dire straits? Economists say that the crisis is a result of many internal problems, such as mismanagement and corruption, but also from external problems, such as a $51 billion debt, the effects of the pandemic and terrorist attacks on tourism, and other problems. Most of the public's ire has been directed at the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. The latter resigned after weeks of anti-government protests that turned violent. Conditions have been deteriorating for a number of years. In 2019, more than 260 people were killed in suicide bombings that went off at churches and hotels. This has ruined tourism, a key source of foreign exchange. The government needed to raise more money as foreign debt for big infrastructure projects soared, but instead, Rajapaksa introduced some of the biggest tax cuts ever implemented in Sri Lankan history, cuts which were only partially reversed after the election. Creditors downgraded the creditworthiness of Sri Lanka and prevented the country from borrowing money as its foreign reserves fell. Tourism was hit hard again when the pandemic hit. In April 2021, Rajapaksa banned the import of chemical fertilizers. Farmers were shocked when organic farming was introduced, and it decimated their rice crops, driving up prices. Imports of other items that were considered to be luxuries were banned to save money on foreign currency. At the same time, the war in Ukraine has pushed up prices of food and oil. Price tags on food were up nearly 60% in May. Compared to a year ago, inflation was near 40%. Why did the Sri Lankan Prime Minister say their economy has collapsed? Such a scathing statement would undermine any kind of confidence that people have in the state of the economy, and it didn't reflect any particular new development. Wickremesinghe reiterates the challenges his government faces in turning things around, as it seeks help from the IMF and faces criticism for the lack of improvements since he took office a few weeks ago. He is also fighting back against criticism from inside the country. His comment could have been intended to give him some time and help him try to get the economy back on track. Finance Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that Sri Lanka only has about $25 million in foreign reserves. It has not enough money to pay for imports, let alone pay back billions of dollars in debt. Since then, the value of the Sri Lankan rupee has declined by nearly 80%, from around $360 to $1. That means import costs will be prohibitive. Sri Lanka has suspended repayment of nearly $7 billion in foreign loans that it is due to repay this year, of a total of $25 billion that will be due by 2026. Who are the Rajapaksa brothers? National protests are demanding that the ruling dynasty of Sri Lanka, the Rajapaksas, be removed. This would be a dramatic reversal for the most powerful political dynasty in the country. Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa were cheered as a hero by the island's majority of Buddhist Sinhalese for ending a 30-year civil war against rebels of Tamil origin in 2009. There are two generals who, despite the accusations of war atrocities, quickly gained great popularity. They were Mahinda, who as president oversaw the end of the war, and Gotabaya, a military strategist whose brutal campaign helped crush rebels. Powerful landowners from the south, the Rajapaksa family dominated local elections for years before becoming national politicians in 2005, when Mahinda became the president of the country. He remained in power until 2015, when he was defeated by opposition leaders who had served as his aides. After the Easter bombings in 2019, the family seized power again under Gotabaya, who ran a campaign of high nationalist rhetoric that won over disillusioned voters. Critics say the Rajapaksas rely heavily on the military to enforce policies, and that they are passing laws to weaken independent institutions and maintain a near monopoly on decisions. 3 other Rajapaksa members also served in the cabinet until early April, when the entire cabinet resigned over the protests. Mahinda's resignation from his office on Monday brought about a partial victory for the protesters. The protests are continuing, especially outside the president's office, and there is a renewed sense of urgency for the president to resign. What is the Sri Lankan government doing to resist their economic collapse? Wickremesinghe has a lot of experience. This is his 6th time leading the government. So far, Sri Lanka has managed to mull it out with the help of $4 billion in credit lines from neighboring India. Indian officials were in Colombo on Thursday to discuss providing more humanitarian aid to the island, but Wickremesinghe warned that there was no way that India would be able to keep Sri Lanka in the water for very long. Sri Lanka puts its last hopes in the International Monetary Fund, IMF, said the headline in Colombo Times newspaper on Thursday. Wickremesinghe said the government is currently in talks with the IMF on a bailout plan. It is expected that the government will have a preliminary agreement with the IMF by the end of July. The Sri Lankan government is also trying to get more aid from China. The US, Japan, and Australia also provided some $100 million extra money as support. The United Nations started a worldwide public appeal for humanitarian aid earlier this month. So far, projects of new government funding barely scratch the surface of the $6 billion needed for this country to stay afloat over the next 6 months. Wickremesinghe told the Associated Press in a recent interview that he would think about buying more oil at a steep discount from Russia in order to help Sri Lanka get through its current fuel crisis. I hope you found this video useful and informative. Please give us a big thumbs up and be sure to subscribe, because more incredible content is on the way. Thanks for watching.